If it bleeds, it leads, right? This is the Nacirema. Mr. Anchorman, Mr. I'll tease the terror threat, weather, sports, and shootings. Mr. I'll become the news more than the news itself. We used to have so much trust in the news, but now it has become a financial juggernaut that is more worried about profits over the people. But what else is new in this encompassing world of American capitalism? Mr. Anchorman, we need some accountability and some answers. With that being said, this is the Nacirema One Pager. Sorry, Mr. Anchorman, we don't trust you. Sorry, Mr. Anchorman, we don't trust you. You ever wonder why we loyally watch what we commonly refer to as, quote, the news, end quote? Quote, the news, end quote, is usually filled with nothing but negative stories, teasers, and the weather. Whether it's local news, open parentheses, which is what most millennials grew up watching, close parentheses, or national news, which exploded in viewership in the 90s and is now a staple in most homes thanks to cable bundling. But why do we watch? Turn on your TV or your mobile device to CNN, Fox News, or MSNBC, and it's a constant stream of partisan politics and/or sensationalized stories. It is a steady diet of, quote, news, end quote, that is designed to keep you watching, but not necessarily educate or inform you. It is biased no matter what they tell you, open parentheses, Fox News slogan, fair and balanced, is comical to say the least, close parentheses. I'm not letting local news off the hook because it isn't any better. The role of local news used to be gargantuan before cable news and on-demand media took off. You had to catch the evening news at 5 or 6 o'clock or the nightly news at 10 or 11 o'clock. If you were a news junkie and craved something broader than local news, you had to catch Peter Jennings, Dan Rather, or Tom Brokaw on the network evening news. These men were the face of a generation that saw the fall of the Berlin Wall, the first Iraq War, the O.J. Simpson trial, and 9/11. ABC's World News Tonight with Peter Jennings was a staple in my house every night at 6:30. Channel 7 Eyewitness News with Bill Butel preceded World News. My father never missed a day of both newscasts, and it always felt like the newscasts gave us just enough to know what was going on without being immersed in too much sensationalism. The news felt beneficial and therapeutic at times. I remember watching WWOR-TV, Channel 9 News in New York, and they had a segment called, quote, good news, end quote. This segment was later in the hour and highlighted news that wasn't negative. It didn't permeate the constant stream of murder and crime that started the news hour off. There were always programs like Charlie Rose and the News Hour with Jim Lehrer, which delivered news and interviews at an unglorified pace that most people today would scoff off. But programs were all substance and no hype. It let the, quote, news, end quote, be the, quote, news, end quote. Quote, if it bleeds, it leads, end quote, was a common phrase used to describe what stories should lead a newscast or newspaper. Well, newscasts have taken that phrase and put it on steroids. The money-making arm of the, quote, news, end quote, has taken over the modus operandi of all newsrooms. When Fox News debuted in the mid-90s, the network mirrored the same fledgling start its sister network, Fox Television Network, had. It had a few good shows with decent revenue, but nothing close to the gigantic returns it has today for its parent company, News Corp. What changed and made the news operations of media companies a huge source of revenue? One event that could be attributed to this is 9/11. When the terrorist attack happened, a lot more people were suddenly interested in national news. Couple this with the availability of cable in every household, and the news turned into a 24-hour, non-stop cycle, which became breeding grounds for, quote, news, end quote, personalities. Suddenly, the same people delivering the news now became the news. The Ashley Banfields and Bill O'Reillys of the cable sphere were now newsmakers as much as they were news announcers. Also, hyper-partisan politics and yellow journalism style, quote, news, end quote, were so ever-present to viewers to the point where networks would post a colored terror alert at the bottom of the screen like it was the daily weather. They succeeded in driving profits higher and higher because viewers couldn't take their eyes off the screen. They created shows like CNN's, quote, Crossfire, end quote, to swing the political pendulum back and forth, which made viewers more knowledgeable, but potentially made viewers biased. Cable broadcasting news now make up a huge chunk of profit for their parent companies Warner Media, News Corp, and Comcast. So what happens when you create a 24-hour cable news network? You inevitably need to fill 24 hours of news programming to fill in those time slots. This is why we see the repeated news watch of the easy-to-kick-around politicians that each side hates. Show Donald Trump and the left is watching because they hate him. Show Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and the right is watching because they hate her. Broadcast a debate on hot-button issues like critical race theory or wearing of masks and viewers are tuning in. Sprinkle some lightning rod personality like Tucker Carlson, Don Lemon, Chris Cuomo, or Rachel Maddow into the mix, and you have the recipe for a 24-hour, billion-dollar cable news network. No wonder news channels like OAN, parentheses, One America News, close parentheses, and CNN Plus are racing to debut on various platforms. Personalities then begin to become the stories, like anytime Carlson opens his mouth and says something about Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, or when former, open parentheses, we'll see for how long, close parentheses, CNN anchor Chris Cuomo's actions in regards to his brother, open parentheses, former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, close parentheses, become front page news. Imagine if legendary reporters Walter Cronkite or Ed Bradley were in the news as much as current broadcasters of today. These news personalities have been newsmakers, and this is what happens when you have non-stop, 24-hour news coupled with firebrand personalities who cater to the worst parts of their audience's emotions. Nevertheless, as long as money is the primary goal in our profit-driven culture, the, quote, news, end quote, will always be a tool of sensationalism. Side-by-side screen debate, cherry-picked partisan fact-check stories, and not so, quote, exclusive, end quote, exclusives will permeate the cable news. Weather teasers and violent stories will continue to top the local news. Can the stories and weather really change from 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. and then 11 p.m.? But again, if it drives up profits for their parent company, it will never end. One of these corporate bigwigs at the news networks must have thought, quote, hey, it works for ESPN, why not us, end quote. But even the constant drip of sports news and highlights can get old after a while when you are watching show after show that clearly resemble each other. Open parentheses, how many duo personality shows can Fox Sports and ESPN create? I myself, however, will still watch, quote, boring, end quote, C-SPAN, Al Jazeera, and listen to 1010 Wins Radio. Mr. Anchorman, we don't believe you because we see you way too much and sometimes your news program is way too biased. Maybe they hope their propaganda will keep you coming back for more. Maybe they understand that emotions usually drive public perception. Or maybe, just maybe, they only care about the almighty dollar. Either way, you stay classy. This has been a Nacirema One Pager. Mr. Anchorman, we don't trust you. Please share, like, and subscribe. And always remember, power to the informed. This is the Nacirema.